Welcome back to the channel. The title of this video is The Goat Code. So this short video explains how goats become goats, why we're not all goats, and how you can become a goat or goat-like. Let's get started. Stated, the GOAT code is about a method and a spirit. Now, of course, GOAT stands for greatest of all time, and here on Goat Tennis we talk about the greatest of all time in a particular technique, and we've been focused on the topspin forehand for the first few months here, because every player except for maybe the big three needs a better topspin forehand. But besides the method and technique of GOATs, we're also talking about the spirit of GOATs. And I've been making the case in past videos and in this video that the way to become a GOAT is to engage in deliberate practice. This is the common methodology that all these GOATs that you see became GOATs. How did I learn about GOATs and deliberate practice? Well, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Everything I learned because I read it in books." I would say something similar, except everything I learned I read in books or watched in YouTube videos. As you know, I'm a subscriber to 50 channels of the best teachers I could find. One of my top 11 books on deliberate practice that I've been recommending and still recommend is this book by Josh Waitzkin, The Art of Learning. Now, Josh Waitzkin was a United States junior chess champion, very celebrated. And he basically burned out by the time he was 16 years old with all the attention that he was getting and the pressure that he felt. So he was sort of like a washed up champion by the time he was 16, and it took him into his 20s to sort of mentally and spiritually regroup. And he decided that he would try another skill completely different, the martial arts, in this particular discipline called pushing hands, which is sort of a combination of hand wrestling and karate. And he engaged in becoming eventually a world champion through the practice, through deliberate practice skills that he had developed. In his book, The Art of Learning, Josh Waitzkin describes the common methodology that he used to become the United States junior champion and a world champion in karate. And you can see in the background here sort of how he describes it. He's described it as a methodology of moving from large circles to small circles to no circles. Well, this is very much the methodology of deliberate practice, and it's very much our practice. You can see in the first videos I was giving you basically the large circle teaching of the topspin tennis. We're talking about wax off and wax on, and the transition from the handbrake, into the slot, and then they'll release into the slot, into the follow through. Basically large circles to see what's the general picture here of this topspin swing that we're going to try to master. And then in the last few weeks, we've started to break that down into segments and more closely refined pieces of information. And we really focused on the drop into the transition point to the slot, and really a lot of detail last week about the first move out of the slot and the key actions that we take. So this is moving into the smaller circles, stages of learning. Now, Waitzkin eventually, in his world championship in karate, gets to the stage of competency and learning of no circles, as he calls it. So what is no circles? And basically the way Waitzkin described it is he had this favorite karate move that he liked to use in his bouts that eventually won him the world championship. And he said at the beginning he was very mechanical about it. It was large circles. He had to think through every segment, like we're thinking through every segment of the topspin forehand. And then he would film it, and then he would, practice again, and then he would add in tougher competitors to test his skills under more stressful conditions. And he was moving into the smaller circles, so he couldn't think about it so much. He was actually in combat, so to speak. And then eventually he got to the stage of no circles, where he said, I wasn't thinking about the movement at all. It just came to me and I did it, executed it unconsciously. So that's the no circle stage of this skill mastery that we're on. What are the other methods that are like deliberate practice that perhaps you've heard of? And you can see in the background there's this diagram of sort of the competency methodology. And we all sort of pass through these phases when we're learning a skill. At the beginning, we're a beginner and we're working with large circles. We don't really know what we're doing. And we don't know what we don't know. So we're unconsciously incompetent. But then as we get instruction, perhaps, and we work on our skills and practice, we start to move to the small stages of learning. And we become fairly skillful. We are consciously competent. We sort of know what we should do and we can do it fairly well. But of course the goal is even higher than that. It's really something like the no circle stage that Josh Waitzkin describes, and in the competency methodology they call it unconscious competence. So you're not thinking anymore consciously about what you're doing, you're just doing it right. And this is the trajectory that we're on here, and we want to continue and understand sort of what stages we're at and keep our hope alive that we're moving in this direction. But there's one further stage beyond unconscious competency, and that's when a performer or athlete gets into sort of a higher level, optimal level of performance called the zone, or also known as the flow, And in this stage, the person understands that not only are they doing it right, but they're doing it at the maximum they're capable of. They reach their full potential. And for the author of the book Flow, by the strange name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian scientist who studied performers, again, in all different domains, he thought, and you can see this if you do a search for him, that being in the flow was sort of the optimal state of a human being and the closest we get to human happiness. Again, I won't go that far, but you can see at the level that these people have achieved as goats. Get too lofty in our thoughts, let's bring us back down to earth and ask ourselves why we aren't all goats. And you can see this quote by Michael Jordan, who many people consider the GOAT in basketball. People don't know that he was actually cut from his basketball team when he was a sophomore in high school. So he wasn't always Michael Jordan. He became Michael Jordan, and part of the incentive for becoming Michael Jordan was being cut when he was a sophomore in high school. So what I've been talking about, the difference between deliberate practice, the kind that Josh Waitzkin used and Michael Jordan used and these other goats, and what most of us know as practice is this sort of random helter-skelter kind of hitting with no purpose, no focus. And as Michael Jordan says, it's really not going to help you that much to practice your old technique, especially if it's not a good technique. You're only going to get good at being bad, as my old Tennis One editor used to say, Dave Smith. So what else prevents us from becoming goats or becoming goat-like? Well, once we pass a certain stage of conscious competency, typically, we basically decide that that's good enough. It's good enough to reach our goal that we've set for ourselves, good enough to make a living, good enough to get the respect of the people we want respect from, and good enough so that I can still have a decent amount of fun, because fun is very important to me. And so we settle for this good enough world, and there's really no need to strain ourselves beyond that. But the founder of the study of deliberate practice, Ericsson, who I've told you about before, he challenges us all on this concept. He says, you know, we're living in a good enough world because we think it's good enough, and we've settled for good enough. And this is what I was trying to discuss a few weeks ago when I brought out my little video essay on what's wrong with American men's tennis. After dominating the professional tour for 30 years, American men who had won 41 Grand Slams, in the last 20 years we've won 0 Grand Slams. And so I was asking what was wrong, and I proposed a couple ideas that really in American culture, and it's not just American culture, but I'm an American and talking about that, and it affects other cultures as well, is that when you have a culture that is focused on quick success, quick status, quick results, and having fun, you know, that is a recipe for just calling it quits after you're good enough. In the last 20 years, I haven't heard any American tennis player said what Rafa Nadal said, which is, you know, we have to suffer. No, I just haven't heard that from an American. I did hear it from Andy Roddick when he was #1 American player for 8 of the 9 years from 2002 to 2010, and I haven't heard it from any other American tennis player. You compare that to stories of the last great American male goat that we had, Pete Sampras. Well, Pete won the 1990 U.S. Open, and but then he came back the next year and he got beat in the quarterfinals by Jim Courier, and he didn't really perform that well and didn't try that hard, and he got called out for it. Jimmy Carter's called him a chicken, and in his book, Pete agrees, and he decided from that point on that he would do what it takes. He would engage whatever he needed to do, endure the suffering to be the best player that he could be. And the rest is history. He won 13 Grand Slams after that and retired, you know, as the GOAT at the time. Andre Agassi sort of went through a similar kind of journey. He won the Wimbledon Championships in 1992, won 3 other Grand Slams, but then he lost his way and was becoming despondent and depressed and could easily have quit. But instead he decided that he would drop out of the tour and take up a challenger tour. And he was current ranking at that time was 141. And this was unheard of for a top American player to drop and go on the challenger tour. But that revived his career, and after that, he wasn't afraid to lose, and he wasn't afraid of the suffering that would be required of him to be his best. And he won 4 more Grand Slams after that, and retired, you know, at the top of the pantheon of American men's tennis. The quote you see here, "Fun is the fast food of the soul." Well, that's actually a quote from one of my books. And if you could forgive me that self-indulgence, it does sort of capture what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, fun is good in its place, but, you know, if we have over-focused on it, then it becomes like a fast food for your soul. It's like fast food. It's not good for your body in the short term, and not good for your health in the long term. In the background here, you see these 2 quotes by Rafa Nadal, who represents, in my view, the opposite of the fast food of the soul approach. Rafa says, you know, I don't like to lose, but I don't fear it either. And why doesn't he fear it? Because he knows he's given his best, and he can let the losing go a little bit easier. And this quote, another quote from Rafa, often he said this, you know, about the struggle that he's just gone through on the court. When people ask him about it, he says, you know, you have to struggle, no? He's saying that basically he accepts the pain willingly in order to achieve something higher, and in that sense he's enjoying it even while he's suffering. So this brings us to another really big distinguishing feature between goatness and goats in us, perhaps, is the humility that they demonstrate when at some point in their careers, it could be early or late, oftentimes it's pretty early, they lose confidence. You know, they're not unconsciously competent any longer, and they drop, and their level drops. And the goats are those people that decide that they're willing to drop down a level or two and undergo sort of the lack of ego that comes from dropping down and training at a lower level. And here I like one of the recent statements by Kyrie Irving. Plays for the Mavericks now, but he was on the Celtics, and he didn't have a good experience with the Celtics. And they asked him about it recently, and he said, "When I was in Boston, I wasn't my best self." And that really says it all, is about what being a GOAT is about, is trying to be your best self. So the GOAT Code is about a method and a spirit. Now, when I used to tell my friends and family that my pursuit of tennis, most of them really would sort of wave me off and say, "Well, good luck to you. I don't know anything about tennis. I really couldn't care less. Goodbye and good luck." Well, maybe you've had that experience as well. So you can see from this video, I hope, that pursuing tennis or any particular sport or domain it goes beyond that domain, it goes beyond that sport, that it does has relevance to a lot of different things in life. And so I would ask you I'd ask you to perhaps send this video to one of your friends and family that has waved you off in the past. Maybe it can open a conversation for once. Regardless, if you're watching this for the first time, I ask you, to become a subscriber, tune into GOAT Tennis. We have a lot more to talk about than technique, and we have a lot further to go in our goal of trying to achieve GOATness.